Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's discussion. My name is Danny Batista. I'm an organizer with Open Primaries. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll get started in just about 2 minutes.
Hey, Gail Peck, you have the most fashionable glasses I have seen this week. You are knocking it out of the park, Gail. And I think everybody's muted. So if you said something, I assume you said something nice back. Thank you. I'm just going to note that in my log. Fashionable kind. Gail.
I concur. Those are some damn fine specs you got there, Gail. I mean, Kathy Stewart might be giving you a run for your money, but I think you're still ahead.
One of my favorite. Can we blather right now, John?
Yeah.
Like my comedian instincts are to never have dead airtime ever, because everybody will leave. So I will just fill the void until you tell me to stop. But one of my favorite things to do is just compliment men's fashion when I'm on the street, because I think, like, in particular for men, we're not really used to people just coming up going like, "Hey man, you are pulling off that jacket. You look great." And you see all these like middle-aged guys where it's like the first compliment they've received in a year, where they're like, "Thank you," and you can see that their posture gets better. And
That's so fun.
Yeah, I'm just like, it's just this tiny little kindness you can do.
All right. Well, you all welcome everybody. Thank you for taking time during your day. You've already heard from our illustrious guest here today. He is I think the best thing to sum him up is he is a deep thinker. He uses words like epistemology, entomology, ontology, and Hobbesian. I have heard him say the word Hobbesian in his podcast. He's a veteran of Capitol Hill and Reason magazine. So naturally, what this esteemed gentleman has done with these life experiences and intellectual skills is become a stand-up comedian. What other route is there? He's actually a gifted political satirist, podcaster, stand-up comedian. Please welcome, everybody, Andrew Heaton.
Hello. Thank you very much. That was a wonderful warm intro. That's absolutely correct. I'm not quite competent enough as a public servant or journalist to do that full time, and I'm not quite funny enough to be a full-time stand-up comedian. So I merged them, and it seems to work okay, of being very funny for a pundit or very responsible for a comedian. One of those two.
You thread that needle very well. So the other thing I failed to mention, you are an independent. You talk on your podcast, The Political Orphanage, which is great. And there's hundreds of episodes going back many years about being an independent voter. And one of the things that's fascinating is that you've evolved how you think about what it means to be an independent, yourself personally and in this world. So today, end of February 2025, how do you think of yourself as an independent? What does that mean? Why are so many Americans becoming independent? Are independents a potential force for positive change in this country? What are you thinking about right now?
Great question. Yes. Let me start big picture, and then I'll zero in on myself. Yes, I think independents are a huge force for change in the country. I've in writing my latest book, I was looking at the rate of independence in the country, and it hits the 51% mark, I want to say, in like 2015 or so. So it's been about 10 years where more people were registered as an independent, or excuse me, as an independent than as a Republican or a Democrat. Right. I think when you add them both up, they still have more, but independents were a bigger voting bloc than either one. It tends to kind of have an accordion process where everybody likes to think of them. By the way, I just got a new camera, so if it zooms in dramatically, I'm not doing that on purpose. Okay. It's because of hand gestures. I'm apparently more Italian than I thought when it comes to gesticulating. So the amount of independence, it gets really big before elections. So like kind of in the lulls between midterms, that's where people like to think of themselves as independents. It'll slim down as we get close to presidential elections, where people will go back to being a Republican or a Democrat. But it's still an interesting phenomenon to look at. And when you talk to people that are more partisan, they will accurately point out that most independents are reliably Republican or Democratic voters. It's hard to get the exact data on that, but my own estimate is probably 80% of people that are independent fairly reliably vote for one party or the other. And so there's a tendency for the party establishments to write off independents as just kind of special. That we, the independents, like to think of ourselves as somehow special. We flatter ourselves as thinking that we're independently minded and that we think our own way through. We're going to go Republican or Democrat. And my response to that is it not telling that we don't want to be in your club?
Right.
Like I would take from that pretty good evidence that, like, if half your voters are going to vote for you and they don't want to associate with you the rest of the political cycle, that's a really big sign that there's a problem, that a huge amount of voters in the country might go reliably Republican or Democrat on a regular basis, but don't want to identify that way. You don't find that kind of umbrage in the 60s. Now, granted, it wasn't as important to people what their political identity was, didn't tend to be all consuming. So yes, I think that independents are a big force. When we look at how the independents break down, I think there's kind of three categories of them. One would be people for whom the Republican and Democratic parties are too, what's the word I'm looking for? Too watered down, too practical. So this would be like people that go, the Democratic Party is Republican light. They're
Yep.
all corporate Democrats.
Yep.
I wish we could get another Bernie Sanders AOC type person. So for them, the Democrats are not pure enough. The Republican version of that would oftentimes go libertarian or something like that, where I'm a conservative, but the Republicans are all these limp-wristed Mitt Romney characters. So that's one kind of independent. Another kind of independent is the true independent. These are probably the minority. These are people who really do not know how they're going to vote from election to election. They might be temperamentally moderate. They might be radical. Very likely, they just don't have a really cohesive system that they're plugging into, or maybe they do, but they really are just very, very step by step. I would like to think that I'm in that category,
Right.
but it's also probably the most self-flattering. The largest demographic, though, would be people that are reluctantly Republican or reluctantly Democrat, people that are moderate Republican or Democrat. And it's not that they think that the parties are too diluted or weak or limp-wristed, it's that they think they've gone too far. So this would be people that are Republican that are like, yeah, I'm a Republican, but like, I don't know, I'm fine with gay people. I'm not entirely, I don't know what the big deal is with the trans stuff. I'm not sure why we're focusing so much on that. Or conversely, it would be Democrats that are like, look, I'm a Democrat. I want there to be social safety nets, regulations, and everything. But like, I think the Democrats are going too far, and I just don't feel comfortable. That, I think, is where most of the independents are. If we're looking at these three categories, a disproportionate amount of the independents are kind of moderate Republicans and Democrats that feel that they have been excluded from their parties due to how extreme and partisan they've become, or they're Republicans and Democrats that 80% believe with their party, but have some things that stick out. Maybe they're a Democrat that likes guns, or they're a Republican that's transgender, something like that, right?
Well,
Which is where I think your organization comes in great, because those people, which are the dominant amount, are people that would be most directly served by open primaries.
Maybe to add a category, I think that there's also, and maybe it's a subcategory within your taxonomy, is that I think that there is a lot of independents feel like there's more complexity in their feelings, their ideas, their relationships that is captured by a binary system, and they just feel culturally very alienated from reductionistic kind of everything needs to be this or that, and don't feel at home with that. And I think also, here's another thing for you to think about, Andrew. I think one of the things the parties have done so well is they've convinced us that there's only one day a year that matters, and that's election day. Because independents, for example, of all the categories that you describe, independents build different social media networks. They tend to have more heterodox social media networks. That's year round. They tend to consume media differently. They tend to value, liberal and conservative conversations in a way that partisans don't. So even if they reliably vote Democrat or Republican, they perform differently throughout the year. And I think that again, the parties that they want us to do nothing all year long, watch football, eat Doritos, and then just vote on election day.
Well, and the other thing they'll do, you're going to get me charged up today, John.
That's my goal.
I think what the two political parties want to do is to rely on fear and hatred to get you to vote.
Yes.
Which is why I would love for there to be open primaries and ranked choice voting. 2016, Trump versus Clinton was the first election we've had where we have data on it, where a majority of voters voted against a candidate rather than for a candidate. You go back to 1982, whatever it is, people that voted for Mondale kind of like Mondale. They thought he was a good guy. There were a lot of people that hated Reagan, but when you asked people, are you voting against Reagan or for Mondale? Most people voted for Mondale.
Wow.
Most people who voted for Bob Dole liked Bob Dole. There were people that were like, I don't care who it is, I'm going to vote for Bill Clinton, or excuse me, I'm going to vote against Bill Clinton. But the majority of people were voting for a candidate. Now, Trump versus Clinton, we move into oppositional voting, where I don't even like the person I'm voting for, but I hate the person that I'm voting against. And I think that the current system that we have of closed primaries, first past the polls, is one where I, as a political party, don't have to actually appeal to you. I don't actually have to make a case to you. I have to just remind you that you hate the other guy more. Listen, I know I am a thieving lizard person, but we got to point out the other lizard person's even worse than me.
Yeah.
And I would love to get it to the point where the parties were in a position where they actually had to make a proactive case for why you want to vote for them. And
that'd be nice, wouldn't it?
It'd be nice. And with closed primaries, first past the polls, you don't have to do that. You just have to say, look, I'm less bad than the other guy. And if you have a thing where you actually have multiple options, then you gotta say, here's why you ought to vote for me.
Yeah. Hey, let me switch gears for a minute. Now, I have like a million things I want to talk to you about, but we're not going to get to them all. But you're a stand-up, you're a satirist, you're creating cultural content that's political, but not only political. And well, actually, before I ask this question, I want to show this wonderful little clip that you made of political satire back in 2018. Danny, can you cue that up?
Coming up.
I think the volume's off, Danny.
I mean, is this guy nuts or what? Hey, in other news we got for you today, a new sex scandal has hit Hollywood. The national debt is at an all-time high, and it looks like Congress is heading for another shutdown. After police burst into his home and shot his 2 dogs in a botched drug raid.
Phil Connors? It's me, Ned.
Ned?
Bing!
What are you doing, Ned?
Going to the protest. How else are we going to get change? You should come too.
Oh, no, no thanks.
Beginning of the end of the Russia story we expected tonight.
North Korea has launched a ballistic missile. Inappropriate sexual behavior.
Is the president a racist?
Wants to spend big money on infrastructure for the Kinkwood.
Did you see the tweet from the president last night? I mean, is this guy nuts or what? Hey, in other news we got for you today, a new sex scandal has hit Hollywood. The national debt is at an all-time high. Burst into his home and shot his 2 dogs in a botched drug raid.
Phil Connors?
Ned?
Bing!
Didn't we do this? Wait a minute, what day is it?
It's February 2nd, Groundhog Day.
No.
Phil, you should come to the protest with us.
Beginning of the end of the Russia story.
North Korean sexual behavior.
A racist.
Big money on infrastructure for the
Did you see the tweet from the president last night? Shot his 2 dogs in a botched drug raid.
Ned,
Phil?
what day is it?
Phil, you don't look so good.
Don't mess with me, pork chop. What day is it?
It's February 3rd.
No, we can't. What?
It's February 3rd. We talked about this yesterday, don't you remember?
So you've been out here protesting 3 straight days?
3 straight days. We've been protesting every day for a year. How else are we going to get change?
Oh, God. Oh. Wait, this is worse. This is so much worse.
Bing!
So now I love that. That, in my mind, that's political satire that really actually opens up your mind, makes you think, kind of challenges conventional wisdom. I experience a lot of political satire as just actually reinforcing preconceived notions and biases. There's Team Blue satire, there's Team Red satire. It's really, and I find it conflicting. Like, as someone who loves Jon Stewart, I don't watch The Daily Show anymore because it just kind of like reinforces a whole bunch of things. So what are you like as a political satirist and stand-up? Like, what is the moment for you? How do you think about it?
Well, the good news is on my end, while I do have viewpoints, I don't claim to be objective or neutral or anything like that. I definitely have my own opinions. But the benefit for me is I've always kind of thought of comedy as a big hole you shovel jokes into. Like the goal is to make people laugh.
Right.
And so that's the top priority. When I do comedy with Reason has its own viewpoint as well that I largely agree with. And so we're taking it from a particular perspective. I think part of it is what you're wanting to satirize and what you're wanting to do. I am interested in ideas and I'm interested in solutions. And so I like doing satire really more on like, this is a program I'm making fun of. Like if I make a funny video, this is a bad system that we're doing. I find a lot of political satire today is really oriented around, look how stupid the other team is.
Yes.
And I find that grating and exhausting, and I don't really get a lot out of it. Like Jon Stewart's a very talented comedian. He's a very, very funny guy. But the kind of like, look how dumb Republicans are, look how dumb Democrats are. I get very bored with that very quickly. And I also think it gets kind of sloppy too. Like, but we have like 370 million people in the country. So there's, I don't know, at the top of my head, 80 million Republicans, 80 million Democrats. Like, they're not all the same. They're a large polyglot group of people. And I get very bored with the other team is evil and bad, and let's just point and laugh at them. And I think it leads to a lot of sloppy comedy as well. A lot of clapter of doing that. And I think on that note, comedy can be a really, really useful tool. There's a comedian named Chris Bliss who made a big impact on me some years ago, where he talked about how if you and I are arguing, theoretically, John and I are at a bar and we're arguing about tariffs, as John and I so frequently do. And we're just, he's a McKinley fan and I'm a Grover Cleveland fan.
McKinley was right.
We're getting into the nature of free trade versus infant economic, whatever.
Right.
When you argue with people, you get the longer you argue, the more cortisol and adrenaline you get. And neither of these are conducive to actually transferring ideas. I would say arguing in general is pretty useless if the goal is to get other people to change their viewpoint. It happens sometimes, but it's very, very rare in my experience to argue with somebody and have them go, "You're right, I'm an idiot. I'll flip over and change." Like, it's rare to happen. Jokes are different though. Jokes have this really unique opportunity where, in my experience, people will stick around for the length of the joke. Like they will temporarily open up their mind long enough to get the joke. Like the defenses are down because I want to understand what the punchline is going to be. So you have this brief 25-second window where you can introduce other ideas to somebody. And because you make them laugh, they get dopamine and serotonin. And so now they're more open. So I find humor to be a much better tool for transmitting ideas. I would much rather watch John Oliver do a policy piece that maybe I disagree with than I would like watching two people argue about it on CNN. I'm more likely to be receptive to the ideas because I'm laughing. And if I don't like them, at least I got some laughter out of it.
That's really interesting. So one of the things we've been kind of dialoguing about in the reform movement is the work we have to do to build trust with the American people. That just because we have our agenda is reform and fix the system doesn't mean people are going to trust us automatically. There's a great deal of mistrust. Is humor a good tool for building trust? Like, is that part of what you're saying? Like that people will suspend distrust for a little bit to hear the punchline? Is that something you've thought about, or am I grasping here?
I think that humor is really good at being able to introduce ideas. I think the trust comes a lot more from respect than it does from humor.
Got it.
In my experience, when I have a conversation with somebody and I am genuinely trying to understand their viewpoint, even if I disagree with it, and I'm able to repeat back to them, John, if I understand what you're saying, your position is that we were at our all-time economic height under McKinley, and that if we were to do that, we would not only protect the American worker, but we would get better affluence. Am I understanding that right? Like when people feel heard and they feel like you're actually communicating with them, I think a lot of it's just respect. Like part of the problem that we have right now as a culture is that politics has become so contemptful. I have lots of, like, I'm from Oklahoma, so I'm ethnically Republican. I live in Washington, D.C., so I'm in a bright blue city. Most of my friends are Democrats. Most of my relatives are Republicans. I'm very capable of loving both of them. When we move into this realm where you are not wrong, you are sinful, we're in a problem space. And like, I don't have any problem with people thinking I'm wrong. I don't have any problem with people thinking I'm crazy. I do have a problem with people thinking that I'm selfish or I'm bigoted. And I think when we enter that space where I'm listening to you so that I can rapidly figure out how to dismiss you, or rapidly figure out how I can veto your opinion because you're part of some ideological section. I think people pick on that rather quickly. Whereas people that extend that kind of just courtesy of, I think you're probably a decent human being. I think that we are probably arguing about methodology to arrive at a country we both broadly want to share that's prosperous, happy, safe, all those things. We're arguing about how to get there. I think that builds a lot of trust, because then the person goes, okay. And then the other bit too, I would add is I find that being very quick to acknowledge what you're wrong about or what you're not confident on does that as well. In my experience, when I'm having a conversation with somebody and I say, like, I'm very confident about this particular thing that we're discussing, this thing over here that I think I maybe like 60% believe this thing. I am not as confident on this thing over here. Like, I'm telegraphing to them, I am open to the possibility that I'm wrong. And maybe we actually will have a productive conversation. So I think that the trust comes from that, where you realize that the other person's operating in good faith.
Boy, that's so fascinating about telegraphing that you might be wrong. Like, that's almost like, I literally remember being in a meeting with like some funders and some big shots in the reform movement and saying some version of that and basically being thrown out of the room, because like there is like this belief that you have to be sure, you have to be, you can't have doubt. That's a sign of weakness in our culture. And it's really, I think it's really, it's really harmful. All right, we're going to open it up for your question.
My catchphrase there, by the way, John, is I just say, I don't want to be wrong any longer than I have to be.
Right.
Like, I've been wrong about a bunch of I'm 41 and I've already been wrong on a bunch of things that are completely mutually exclusive. So I'm inferring right now that I'm probably wrong about a quarter of the stuff I believe. I don't know which part. That's the problem. The problem is I don't know what I'm wrong about, but I'm guessing. And so, like, if I'm wrong, I want you to let me know. And I'll say, like, a tool that I find very helpful that I'm kind of new to. Have you ever heard of Bayesian reasoning?
No.
Oh, I love this. Great. Okay, I can share this with you. So, like, usually when we're talking about right and wrong, or like certitude, we're like, I believe this, I don't believe this, or I think this is true, I think this is false. That's not really how human beings think most of the time. So, for example, I 80% believe the Warren report on the Kennedy assassination. I 80% think that it probably went down. I 20% don't think that. Now, if I have to make a note of like, which way am I going to fall? I'm going to go with, probably a lone shooter, Lee Harvey, but it's not 100%. I like 90% think ghosts don't exist. 10% of me thinks ghosts exist. And I think that a lot of the time we're operating that way. So with Bayesian reasoning, you're just up front. So like, you're like, I don't know what we're arguing. We're arguing about like, deportations or something. And you're like, there's a difference between saying I 90% disagree with this versus like, I 70% disagree with this, but there's 30% doubt I have. Then that invites the immediate question, well, like, what are you doubtful of? And you go, well, you know what? I understand the economics of the situation, but I don't know a lot about the actual infrastructure that goes into ICE and stuff. And I don't feel that confident on that. And you can now have a conversation where maybe the other person does know that, and they can fill you in, or alternately, they know that you're being upfront and honest, and that you're actually trying to figure this out with them, as opposed to beat them into the ground with your moral certitude.
Right. All right. If you want to ask a question, just again, go to the chat, put your name, your state, 1-sentence description, and then I'll call on you to ask your question of Andrew. Before I do that, a couple more things, Andrew. So You and I both have trained in improv. I'm a big fan of yes and as not just a little theater trick, but as a political, social, humanistic methodology. I actually have been kind of like, how do we bring more yes and ism into the political civic sphere as opposed to the no but, which seems to dominate. Am I crazy for thinking that? Is that run through your head every now and then?
Yeah, no, I think you're right on that front. And two things immediately leap into my mind there. The one is that I think for people, how do I put this? I think I'm probably ankle deep in autism, John. So I say this as a non-pejorative. It would not surprise me if I'm on the spectrum. If not, I share many qualities with people on the spectrum. People of my bent, including me, tend to like, once we get into a political conversation, we have to say the thing we were going to say. Like somebody says something dumb, like, there's 48 states because North Dakota, South Dakota only count as one state. And it's like, no, that's not like, I have to correct the record.
Right.
And it's this. And I find that very rarely does anything. Improv training really, really helped me with that. Because with improv training, you got to be fluid and you got to be plastic. And like,
you can't hold on to your idea.
I thought, I came in and I say like, wow, John, it really sucks that hard day being beavers, isn't it? And I think we're going to have some like funny scene about you and I are beavers. And you're like, even harder now that we're getting a divorce. And I'm like, oh, never mind. The bit that I thought we were going to do is dead. I got to let go of that. And now John wants to go that direction. I found improv to be very helpful in that, to be a little bit less terrier-like. The other thing I'll say is that I think that I've done stand-up, improv, and sketch. Stand-up's a very solitary phenomenon. You're up there on stage by yourself. Improv is by definition collaborative. It's like you're improvising with another person. It's not competitive. You're not competing with another person. You're building something with them. Yeah. And I think a lot of political dialogue works better that way. Like a tiny little tool that I learned from Peter Boghossian that I think works great is if you're having a discussion or an argument with somebody, just saying we instead of you alters the trajectory of the conversation so much. So if you and I are talking about building the wall, and I go, well, what are you going to do about the fact that most illegal immigrants are just people that overstayed their visa? How's that? That's very like, now I'm fighting you, right? But if I say, what do we do about the fact that most illegal immigrants overstayed their visa? Now I'm communicating that I'm viewing the situation like you and I are on the same team, and we're confronting a joint problem, and we have a different viewpoint, which is, I think, much more towards improv, whereas people tend to treat politics like boxing. I would rather they approach it like improv, as you say.
Well, in improv also, the best scene partners are wildly different. Like both of them or groups of them bring different things to the table. Difference is related to as richness of material. It's not related to as division. Whereas in politics, differences are related to as problems.
Yeah.
To be converted into division. In improv, it's the exact opposite.
And they're not, by the way. Like no. I've got my own very specific, like I don't even know what to call it, but I've got my own clear worldview schema thing that I'm applying. I need smart people I disagree with to keep me from being dumb.
Yes.
Because if I sit in a room with a bunch of people that agree with me, we're going to have blind spots. That's just how homogeneity works. So and on my end, like I'm at the point now where I don't even want to convert people to what I think. What I want to do is make them a smarter version of whatever they are. So if I'm talking to a Republican or a Democrat, I don't expect them to become an independent and be some like half Andrew Yang, half George Will Chimera like me. What I want to do is get them to be the smartest version of the thing they are, because I want there to be smart, good people in both parties. And I'd like for both parties to release their death grips and the independents could get more of a say.
Well, let's open it up now. We're going to go to Peter Knight in Pennsylvania, who has a question about that. Go ahead, Peter.
Okay, it seems that quite a few people are in favor of not only independent primaries, they're against gerrymandering, and they're in favor of ranked choice voting. So why not get together in a party that is running candidates, like the Forward Party, which is it's after the merger over a year ago with the Renew America movement and the Serve America movement, they decided to concentrate only on electoral reforms and allow people to build their own platforms based on what they believe and what they think are the needs of the people in their constituency. And so rather than be independent, we believe that we can aggregate independents into a group that starting to run their own candidates rather than just vote for whatever Republican or Democrat is less painful.
Mm-hmm.
Fair. Well, I think I actually am a member of the Forward Party. I for all of the reasons that you outlined, Peter. I'm both an Andrew Yang fan and I'm very big on electoral reform. So I think actually, if you put like a gun to my head and you're like, have you ever joined a political party? I'd be like, well, I joined the Forward Party back in 2021 or something like that. I think for me, conversationally, independent probably works better just because I'm in political media. And when we're not talking about electoral reform, Forward Party would muddy the waters a little bit for the reasons you bring up, that it's so focused on electoral reform that if we're discussing economics or we're discussing culture war stuff or judicial issues, independent's a better way for me to communicate where I'm at. But in terms of the Forward Party itself, I'm a fan. I think it's a really smart idea. With third-party movements, there's really two ways to do it. You either become effectively a caucus within one of the two major parties, like the the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, so or Justice Democrats. Like AOC would say, it's weird that I'm in the same party as Joe Biden, but that's practically what we got to do. So I'll be a part of this caucus, right? That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is to be a third party. And historically, what we do in the States with third parties is they focus on one issue. They make a big enough stink about it that they threaten to spoil the election. And then one of the two major parties goes, okay, we'll do it. And then they get absorbed and they float it away. What the Forward Party's done that's very interesting, and I hope it works, is that the Forward Party has said, we are focused on electoral reform and some very basic broad things like good governance, but mostly electoral reform. And we're a polyamorous party. You can be a member of the Forward Party. You can be a Democrat. You can be forward and a Republican, forward and a Libertarian. We don't really care. We're just getting this group of people together. I think it's great. I moved to D.C. in December, and there were a lot of Forward Party candidates that were running in D.C. And I think that there's an opportunity in places that are very homogenous for that to work. Like a Republican's not going to do well in D.C. at all. But you could run as a Forward Party candidate and maybe have a shot. So there's this kind of, or like in Oklahoma, like you're not, if you go out to like Wood County, you're probably not going to do well as a Democrat. But if you run as a Forward Party candidate, people don't even know what it is. So they're like, I don't know, seems okay. The guy has a cowboy hat. So I'm a fan. I wish Forward Party luck in everything it's doing. I'm a big fan of Yang. I've had, is it Gail? What's her name? There was a lady that wrote a book called The Politics Industry where I've derived Catherine Gale. Thank you. I'm a big fan of Catherine Gale. I found that through Andrew Yang's podcast. I think the Forward Party is largely promoting her viewpoint on that, which I think is correct. So yeah, good on Forward Party.
Yeah, I was just having I was at a meeting with Andrew Yang and a number of Forward Party people on Monday down in Washington, and they're doing great. They're growing. They're attracting candidates. They're attracting activists. I think the thing for me personally is that we need organizations like the Forward Party that are organizing alternatives, and we need political systems that allow voters that don't want to join a political party of any kind, third, fourth, fifth, minor, major, they don't want to be in a party the same way a lot of young people don't want to sign up at Blockbuster. You know, there's cultural changes going on in this country that are very rapid. And a lot of people, the word party is a bad word, and we need to find ways to organize them without insisting they join a particular framework that they might not be comfortable with.
Yeah. Plus, I think the Forward Party too, like for people that are politically active at this point, switching from Republican to Democrat or vice versa is like converting to an enemy religion.
Right.
And Forward Party doesn't have that stigma. Forward Party, there might be people on the phone call for whom it is a big part of their identity. But in my experience, Forward Party is an asterisk you're adding to some other political identity of I am in favor of electoral reform. It doesn't carry that same baggage. Like I was at Burning Man a few years ago, and good intro. And I was talking to a guy, I was living in Austin, Texas at the time. And the guy went, Oh man, I love Austin. You know, I'm really tempted to move down to Texas just to try to bring more Democratic votes down there and like fight the good fight. And I was like, well, why don't you just become a Republican in whatever state you're in? Like, wouldn't that accomplish the same thing of bringing that? And he just balked. Like in his mind, it would be better to move to Texas and find a whole new community than to become a Republican. They're heathens. So there's a lot of wait, John. Can I lob a question at you?
Yeah.
Okay, great. One of the few things I was optimistic about in the direction of our country the last few years is we seem to be making inroads on electoral reform.
Yeah.
We got ranked choice voting in New York City. Alaska went top 4 open primaries, ranked choice voting. There seemed to, and then in the last election, everywhere but DC got a shellacking. So should I give up hope? What's going on? What's your read on that?
Oh, I think it was a big positive step forward. I was telling a group of funders in Denver a couple of weeks ago that when I started open primaries in 2009, it wasn't even a possibility that we'd ever have a year in which we could lose so much. Like that's how much the issue has really
become a national conversation.
Yeah,
like, kind of the same way that like UBI was entirely science fiction-y stuff till Yang came around.
Yeah, exactly. Political reform, structural reform, not just, dealing with curbing abuses within the system as organized, but changing the rules of the game is now in the mainstream. Now, I think, and there's a lot of debate about this. I don't pretend to know everything. There's a lot of other people that have different opinions. My opinion is that as this issue and this movement has gotten mainstream, we've grown very quickly and we've attracted some donors that want to win very quickly. And we've skipped over some steps. We've skipped over a certain kind of trust building, foundation building, developing local spokespeople so that when we put a referendum on the ballot, it's not seen as a bunch of out-of-state forces trying to change the system here. It's seen as organic and local and connected. And again, we went through what we learned an enormous amount this year. And even in these states like Arizona, opposed by the Democratic Party, opposed by the Republican Party, we were opposed by every political hack in the whole state. We got 42% of the vote.
That's great.
And other states, Montana got 49%. We got beat, but we grew, and our movement is now poised to make some significant gains, including in Oklahoma. We're going to be on the ballot in Oklahoma in 2026.
Oh man. Okay. Hey, John, listen, please keep me in your back pocket because I am from Oklahoma. And while I have been gone low these many years, I remain a dedicated, proud Oklahoman, and I can talk Okie. And would be happy to fly in.
Well, I'm going to introduce you to Margaret Kobos, and you're going to love her, and she's going to love you. And they've put together a dream team there of Democrats, Republicans, independents, tribal leaders, young people, the Oklahoma Academy, former elected officials, some wealthy folks, some students, and they're really. And the thing about Oklahoma that I find so exciting is it ain't abstract. It's not reform as some good government thing. They're going out there and saying, we got the worst education system in America. We have the lowest voter turnout in America. Why? Well, we have a closed system that's out of step with our state. Let's open it up, let all voters vote. So
that's good. Cause like in Oklahoma too, like the thing that'll resonate with Okies is like, I don't know. I think you as an individual can just make decisions and vote. I don't think you need the parties to rig it to figure out how to like it's a very independently minded state, and the party machines are strong there, but it also is really, really strong referendums. We legalized marijuana in Oklahoma back in like 2016, I think 2017. And it was like no one in the state legislature, like everybody was like, no, drugs are bad. Hang them from a tree, only cost 30 cents for a rope. And then when they actually just got it on the ballot, like, you want marijuana to be legal if you smoke it in your own garage? Oklahoma was like, yes, it's your garage. You should do whatever you want. What are we? King George III, England? There's a lot there. And I think you're right about the trust thing too, because like I'm preaching your gospel on open primaries, and I've found that the thing that I have to communicate to other people is I've been on a few shows where by virtue of being from Oklahoma and not saying the word justice a lot, I sound Republican, even though I haven't been a Republican since my sophomore year of college. And so I'll talk to people and what they hear is, why should I let you pick the Democratic Party candidate? And I'm like, well, I don't want to do that at all. In fact, I would be fine with getting rid of I would be fine with you having a stronger party than it currently is. But what I want is kind of where, teachers union can endorse anybody they want, but they don't get to pick who's on the ballot.
Right.
The Chamber of Commerce can endorse whoever they want. They don't get to pick who's on the ballot. That's what I want. I want the political parties to be clubs rather than gatekeepers.
Yes, that's the big difference that we're challenging. The other thing, just to add to keep answering your question, the vast majority of the American people, whether they live in an open primary state, a nonpartisan primary state, or a closed primary state, they still relate to the primaries as that's where the activists vote. Mm-hmm. I vote in November.
Right.
Even though all the decisions are made in the primaries, the November election in 90% of the cases is an afterthought. That's how we've been taught to think. And we have to change the rules. We have to open them up. We have to make them nonpartisan, and we have to educate the entire country that you got to vote in May and November.
I'm 100% with you. One of the things that I routinely tell people is because it's like, what, 10% of people show up in the primaries, something like that. It's like of registered voters, only 10% participate in the primaries, who are way more conservative than the average Republican, let alone the average voter, or way more progressive than the average Democrat, let alone the average voter. So independents like myself are constantly confronted with, you get to pick between Ramsey Bolton and King Joffrey. Which one do you want? And I'm like, well, I don't really like either of these guys. I'm either a wildling or a Tyrion Lannister guy. One of those. I'm either a moderate or a libertarian. What are the two? I don't really like either of these people. But the system has been constructed in such a way that we have an artificial exacerbation where the parties functioning as gatekeepers go further blue or further red than the actual voters would otherwise have them, which is why I'm very big on open primaries, ranked choice voting.
All right. We have a whole bunch of people ask very similar questions about momentum and systems. I'm going to roll it up and have Kip Froelich from Florida kind of gatekeeper for these questions, or not the gatekeeper, the torchbearer. So Kip, go ahead, ask your question.
So obviously the being disruptive and the trying to disrupt the system, break the system, we need to overthrow. That's very popular right now, and it obviously is popular with MAGA and where they're at. But in the 60s, that was the Democrats.
Right.
We're against this. We're the party of revolution. Don't trust the man, and it switched. But why can't the open primary movement kind of leverage that and say, let's message more that we want to break the system. Mm-hmm. We want to disrupt the system, and the elites that are the system are both the R's and the D's. And so I feel like a messaging needs to occur to get that momentum that seems so popular right now, and want to know your thoughts on how that could work, or if it's just ridiculous.
It's a great question, Kip. And I also really like that you use the word elites. There's an economist that I'm a fan of named Arnold Kling, who wrote a book a couple of years ago called The Three Languages of Politics. And he postulates that Republicans, Democrats, and libertarians tend to they don't even realize they're doing it. They tend to use very specific thought patterns and language to communicate with each other. So progressives tend to talk in terms of big guy versus little guy, oppressor versus victim. Conservatives tend to talk in terms of civilization versus threat to civilization, civilization versus outsiders, or civilization versus entropy. Libertarians tend to talk in terms of voluntary and involuntary. And there's kind of a fourth way of thinking that we're seeing globally right now, which is populist, which is outsider versus insider, or forgotten versus elite, a disruptor versus institution. The 60s, I wasn't present for that, but I think the 60s was largely coming in more on that progressive heuristic of we're the little guys fighting the oppressor. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but it was very coded with being specific to the progressive movement. The way you phrased it of elites, I think, would resonate much better in our current moment of who should have the power in democracy, the people or the party leaders? Do the party leaders serve the parties, or do they work as a fourth branch of government? And I don't tend to think of myself as a populist, but I would say I'm very much on the populist side of that. Of like, I would rather just have it be there's 5 people that are on the ballot for governor, and it's just whoever has the most signatures. That's it. And Republicans and Democrats, you pick whoever you want to endorse. And if they're not on the ballot, then you've got a really crummy candidate, and we shouldn't have to kowtow to you. But that's not us taking power away from the people. It's giving power to the people. So I think if you can tap into that institutional distrust that seems to be pervasive right now in pretty much every institution, from Congress to media to academia, and plug the political parties into it, it would be very effective rhetorically.
Just maybe one thing to add to that, Kip. I think that in our movement, we have to pay attention to 2 things simultaneously. Message, and I am 100% with you and with Andrew as well, that tapping into that, pro-people, anti-elite sentiment is really important. But we have to pay attention to message and messengers. When you go to the people and you say, we want to change the system, we want to open it up, we want to make it more fair, they don't just listen to your words, they listen to who's saying it. And we have to put a lot of energy into developing a broad range of spokespeople that are from the right, from the left, from the middle, they're not ideological, from all over the place. Because if the American people only hear open primaries or reform spokespeople coming from one wing of the political realm, they're not going to trust us. They're going to say, oh, this is Team Blue trying to change the rules to get over on Team Red. And they're just like, nope, we're not going to change the rules.
One of my dear friends is formerly a data scientist at NYU. She was a political science professor at NYU for a while. And we've had several conversations about how to change people's minds. And the data that we have is, it is, again, very rare to be able to argue people into submission. Most of the political change appears to be from someone you largely agree with, making a determinant. So theoretically, if I am a Republican and I am in favor of electoral reform, that's going to be way more resonant with other Republicans than if a Democrat comes in. Just in the same way that, like, I know I come off as like a neoliberal moderate dude. I shouldn't go talk to the Democratic Socialists of America. I'm going to get their hackles up. They're not like, I'm going to walk in and they're immediately going to be like, no, not this guy. But I could go talk to the Chamber of Commerce if I like comb my hair and stuff, put on a tie. But I would probably resonate more with them. But John, I think you're right about that. I think a lot of it, the messenger is important. It needs to feel, people kind of need to feel like the person's sort of their clan, to be receptive.
All right, we got one more political question. I really love this question. This is from Robert Koch in Pennsylvania about different pairings of reforms. Go ahead, Robert. Did I get your name wrong? You still there, Robert?
Yeah, I'm here. Couch, yeah, couch is fine.
Couch, okay.
Yeah, so the question is, let me just pull it up right here. Are there other election reform goals that pair well with open primaries, such as ranked choice voting? I know we said that before. Or when we group too many election reform objectives together, is it possible we distance ourselves from too many voters? Something
maybe so.
Right.
I tend to treat ranked choice voting and open primaries, qua Catherine Gale, as a joint activity. I think that you kind of need to have them in conjunction with one another. I suppose I would settle for either or, but they seem to solve kind of the 2 problems. But to your point, yes, I think you could overdo it. This is one of the reasons where I've talked about ranked choice voting several times on my podcast, The Political Orphanage, which, by the way, anybody who's fallen in love with my dulcet baritone voice and quippy style, I invite you to check out The Political Orphanage. You might enjoy it. Whenever I talk about ranked choice voting, I have really, really smart listeners, and immediately somebody will email me and go, well, it's actually much better to have star voting or approval voting, and approval voting superior to ranked choice voting. And my response is, I think you're probably right. I'm sure that the research is correct, and I'm sure that smarter people than me have actually said approval. The thing is, though, ranked choice voting seems to be the only reform that broadly people know in the country right now. Like if I bring up ranked choice voting, I find that friends know what it is. They've heard of it. If I bring up approval voting, now I have to explain, even though approval voting is probably better, I have to explain it. So like on my end, I'll settle for ranked choice voting. I would rather take the existent knowledge of that and work with it and get something that I 90% want than lose all of that trying to explain a more obscure, better thing that I'm not going to get at all. There are lots of other electoral reforms we could do that I would be all in favor of. Like, I think gerrymandering is odious. I imagine most of the people on this call would agree with me that that politicians should be selected by the electorate. They shouldn't select their electorate. That is a deeply anti-democratic and corrupt way of running a political system. I think that just saying we need ending gerrymandering is probably a good one. But when we get into like ways to do it, we might overwhelm it. Like you could theoretically just have one big at-large congressional district. There's nothing that would constitutionally prohibit you from doing that. You wouldn't have to get an amendment. Oklahoma could tomorrow, if it wanted to, it could just say from now on, we're going to have 7 members of Congress for the whole state. And just every election, just mark down your congressman in order of preference. The top 7 will represent the whole state. We could do that. But I think it gets complicated enough that I kind of want to leave that for phase 2 or some other organization rather than Andrew Heaton's 18-point. I am always at risk of coming up with an 18-point, 40-page white paper that I now have to explain to everybody and come up with jokes for and lose a lot of the clout. So I personally focus on open primaries, ranked choice voting.
Yeah, and maybe just to add to that, I think that one of the things that we and I say this as someone who I want like dozens of reforms. I want to get rid of party voter registration. The government shouldn't be keeping the party rolls, for the private organizations. There's redistricting, open primaries, alternative ways of voting, proportional. There's a million things that we should be doing. The danger in combining them is if you combine them and then you don't tell the voters that you've combined them. If you put together a package and then you only campaign with the most popular element of that package, because look, winning a campaign is hard. You have to do 30-second commercials. It's hard to say, vote yes on this. It contains element A, B, C, and D. But if you don't be honest with voters about what you're putting in front of them, it will bite you in the ass. Because here's what your opponents will do. Your opponents will say, hey, this group says they want open primaries, but really what they want to do is this other thing. And they're not telling you about it. And then all your supporters will vote no, even though they support the issue. So I think we just did a great campaign in Washington. We got open primaries and ranked voting together on a single package. But the local team there campaigned on both those things because it was a market in which they didn't have to do television ads. They could just go to the street fairs and the gay pride parade and knock on doors and have time to talk with voters about what they were doing. They got 75% of the vote. So if you're going to combine things, you better be committed to an honest campaign. Otherwise you won't win. Or even if you do win, it'll get overturned. That's how I think about it.
One more thing I'll add.
Yeah.
I'm a nerd. The people that listen to my podcasts are nerds. So they're happy for me to sit down and be like, well, could we have we could do more of a German style parliament? Like they're here for that. But I think most people in the United States are a lot less politically interested, which is totally fine, by the way. Like the whole purpose of the Republic's experiment was that you don't have to make politics a dominant factor in your life on a daily basis. You elect somebody on your behalf to go do that stuff, and you get to focus on your family and your business. Totally fine. I don't begrudge anybody, but most people are not in that camp. Most people are not thinking about this on a regular basis, and I think can be very overwhelmed by kind of Byzantine level analysis, and would do well to just have a tight focus.
Yeah. All right. One last question. It's about being a comedian. This is from Mike Pearson. Go ahead, Mike.
Let me see. Am I on?
There you go. You're good. You're good.
Okay, fantastic.
You're
All
on,
right,
and you have magnificent facial hair, Mike.
Yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask you, Andrew, how did you actually get recognition and actually get to your position as an independent political comedian? And secondly, do you think that there's a path forward where we can get more independent media, whether it's media personalities who are comedians or serious news, and get more exposure for that?
So if I'm understanding your question, is twofold. How did I get to where I'm at, not being partisan or being independent? And how would open primaries and other such organizations find other people like this to get in front of the media?
Yes.
Something like that. So on my end, it has been a slow, torturous journey. And I will add that while I'm fine and I'm able to afford an apartment and a dog and even take a girl out on a date occasionally, I'm not famous. So or I'm famous to the point where when I go to Home Depot, a middle-aged man shaped like a bathtub will recognize me. That's about where I'm at. About like one Home Depot visit per month is the level of fame that I've got. With stand-up comedy, I will say stand-up comedy does tend to have more independently minded people in it. I find that with stand-up comedy, even probably the majority are Democrat or Democratic leaning, but there's a really strong anti-authoritarian streak in stand-up comedians. And so you will find that even the people that are reliably Democratic don't like being told what to do, and definitely don't like being given a party line that they have to uphold. They also tend to be a lot more defensive of a joke, even if it runs afoul of whatever a political party would want. Comedians, for our myriad psychological problems, do tend to defend other comedians when we get in trouble for offending the Republicans or the Democrats. In my case, I kind of go back and forth. So when I do stand up, I either do politics or I don't do politics at all, and I've learned that through trial and error. One of the weird things about doing stand-up political comedy, which I've been doing now for a long time, is if I get booked to do a conference, like if Open Primaries has a conference or something and I were to come do it, everybody kind of knows what they're getting, and I can also tailor it to the crowd, and so it's fine. If I do stand-up at a random club and I start getting into politics, what I will typically do is I'll make fun of Republicans, then I'll make fun of Democrats, then I'll make fun of libertarians, then I'll probably tell horse jokes or something. And in my mind, what I'm doing is letting everybody know that I'm an equal opportunist. In my experience, if I'm dealing with a civilian population that doesn't know I'm telling political jokes, they get really uncomfortable. People they get afraid that I'm going to call on them and demand that they explain why they voted for Romney or whatever. And I'll lose the audience. When I make fun of the Democrats, the Republicans will love it, and I'll lose the Democrats. And then I have to rehabilitate the Democrats. So it becomes difficult. I get why it's easier just to pick a viewpoint and stay with it. In terms of getting comedians and having them come out in front of culture, this is more of a niche topic culturally for people than, say, Donald Trump, which tends to be the dominant position or the dominant issue, right? I would imagine there are probably a lot of comedians that would agree with us. Maybe they don't even know, but if we talk to them, they would agree with us. The one thing that I would strongly urge, though, is I've seen this happen multiple times where someone will have some political project they want to do, and they want to bring in a comedian like me to be involved in the political project. And that's fine if you want to do like a funny explainer video, which is my bread and butter. That's what I do over at Reason, where I take, we're going to talk about the national debt and I'll put in jokes. That's fine. You do have to remember, though, that it becomes real easy to wander into agitprop, where the point is I'm trying to get people to agree with me, and I'm going to put some jokes on top so they don't notice, and people can feel that.
They smell it out. Yeah.
They smell it. Like I think one of the reasons that The Daily Show was so successful when it came into its own in the 2000s was it was definitely progressive leaning show. It was definitely a Democratic show, but I don't think that anybody at The Daily Show at that time was sitting down going, how do we shape the national narrative to help the Democrats? And then we'll come up with some jokes. They were just writing jokes, and they happened to be Democrats. So if you were looking to get comedians involved, what I would find is I would identify comedians that you broadly agree with and then kind of let them loose. as opposed to trying to weaponize comedy. I find that weaponized comedy oftentimes backfires.
Yeah, that's helpful. All right, Andrew, thank you. We're out of time. Thank you all for joining. Just before we go, how can people follow you, Andrew? What are you working on? What can people do to stay connected to your work?
I got two things. I host a show every week called The Political Orphanage. You all probably qualify. If you're on this call, I think you're probably my target demo. It's people that do not feel like they are catered to by red team and blue team. Can include Republicans and Democrats, just means you're not super comfortable with it. Like I said, I have friends on both sides. I'm just trying to figure stuff out, make things better. This week's actually a pretty good week to start because I brought on my friend Jeff Maurer. He's also a comedian. He's a former writer for Last Week Tonight, and we have a conversation about things the government can quit doing that is currently irritating or could help us stop, which is irritating. So we have a long conversation about low flow toilets, just based on the brief glimmer of demography I saw on today's phone call. My guess is 99% of you have opinions on low flow toilets, and you will find them vindicated on this week's episode of The Political Orphanage. So I invite you to check that out. The other thing I would suggest is in October, I published a book called Tribalism is Dumb, which would overlap tremendously with what we're talking about. And Tribalism is Dumb is focused on why did everybody go nuts over the last 20 years? Like, what happened? Why did everybody? And what I try to do in that book is go, I think that we are evolutionarily wired to be partisan or to be clannish or tribal, however you want to say it. And I kind of chart why that is. And then in phase 2, I talk about why it went nuts. If it's constant, why did it get worse in our culture? And then phase 3 is kind of what we've been talking about today, which is what do we do about it? A lot of which is electoral reform. But if you're on that side of you like thinking about things, you tend to approach things systemically, and you are bothered by the level of rancor and cruelty which has entered American partisan politics, the book Tribalism is Dumb, I think will make you feel better because you'll understand what's going on a little bit better.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, Andrew. Really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you all for joining us. You'll be getting a video in a couple days so you can share this conversation with friends and colleagues. And we'll see you next month. Take care.